The material contained in the Diverging Clear Podcast is for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed in the podcast does not represent the views or wishes of the National Rail Passenger Corporation or Amtrak or the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. This is the Diverging Clear Podcast.
Approach diverging, milepost 20.04. Diverging clear, milepost 20.06. Welcome to Diverging Clear, your transportation podcast, with your hosts William Moore and Jermaine Walker.
Welcome to the Diverging Clear Podcast, Episode 3, Pullman and the National Policy to Disenfranchise Urban America. I'm your host, William Moore, and I'll be flying solo on today's episode. First, I'd like to thank you for sticking around and continuing to check out the podcast. I had to take a hiatus while dealing with the sudden loss of my mother on Easter Sunday. My mom was a very integral part of this podcast. That professional voice that you hear for the advertisement read for EME Rail Solutions LLC, that was my mom. She also taught me the various streaming applications, including the OBS production application that I'm currently using now. She taught me ins and outs of it and how to set these things up. To be honest, my mom was a huge techie. She loved figuring out how to best utilize these tools, and she shared it with me. Before I get started, I just want to say, I miss you, Mom. I love you. Thank you for everything that you've done. Every podcast will be dedicated to you because without your expertise and tutelage, I wouldn't have been able to come up with some of these production techniques and different things that I utilize. Also, you were one of my biggest fans, my first subscriber to the Diverging Clear Podcast. So, just that in general, Ma, I just want to say thank you as I start this episode, ending the hiatus. Just want to say thank you and I love you, and thank you for everything you've done. Just going to have a couple seconds of silence for my mom, Miss Crystal L. Moore, passed away Easter Sunday of 2022. You and my hearts always will be, and I love you. All right, so thanks again for tuning in to the Diverging Clear Podcast. We're going to go ahead and get started. A couple of stories I'm going to start with here, just a couple of recent news stories here just to get us caught up on what's going on in the world of railroading. There's been a lot going on since the last time I spoke with y'all. So just a couple stories I'm going to touch on here before we get to our main story. I'm not going to talk too long on them, just some real brief. First thing we'll talk about is the STB orders the 4 Class 1s to provide more detailed service recovery plans. During this time, the STB held hearings regarding concerns that shippers were having with the poor service qualities that were being put out by the 4 major Class 1 railroads and some others. Basically, the STB told them they needed to start reporting daily on their attempts to move cars for customers. Customers were complaining that they would request 7 days worth of service. The railroad would respond with they're only giving them 5. Some customers require 5 days switching, they would only give them 3. So a lot of those type of issues were being discussed, and people were being charged for cars that they released back to the railroads, and the cars weren't being picked up, but yet they were still being charged. So a lot of that stuff the STB started requiring the 4 Class 1s to start reporting on. They told them to come up with plans on how they were planning to start mitigating some of these things. And when they submitted the plans, the STB was not at all pleased with the response that they got. So they ordered them to, a couple of them to do more detailed planning for what they want to get resolved. And so we'll be watching that to see how that comes out. Like I said, this is a pretty cool, to me, statement that this STB, but this board and the members of this board aren't playing with the Class 1s. As much as they would like to say it's staffing issues and different supply chain issues, a lot of this has not been helped by the Class 1 railroads. They've kind of during their PSR, they shortened or cut down a lot of their labor groups, including transportation and maintenance. Some of these things were self-inflicted, and I believe the STB recognizes that. So they're trying to get them to get it back on the same page, getting this stuff moving. Because listen, at the end of the day, the reason why I mention this is because this drives up the price of goods that we have. This inflation, this record inflation that we're seeing right now, is not solely caused by the railroads, but I can tell you it's not being helped by the railroads, where customers aren't able to produce the goods that they need or to get the raw materials that they need or have the outbound finished products moved like they should. So, it's interesting just to see how this plays out, but let's just be real. A lot of this does affect the inflation rate of everything that we purchase. Just about everything that we have. Yes, it moves by truck, but a lot of those trucks move by trains. A lot of those raw materials move by trains. So don't think that this does not affect your everyday life, because it absolutely does. Second story I'm going to bring up here is the STB orders mediation in the Gulf Coast case. Now, this is that case, we kind of mentioned this before. I try to stay away from the Amtrak cases just for the fact that I am employed by Amtrak, and I don't want to, cause any conflict of interest or state anything that could be derogatory towards my company. So I try to always keep an open balance with this, and when I discuss these stories. But the STB did order mediation in the Amtrak Gulf Coast case. They want Amtrak, the Norfolk Southern, and CSX to work together to come up with a way to be able to restore this service. I think it's a fair way to go, but let's just see how it works out. Like I said, I'll kind of stay brief on that story, but that has happened, and we'll see what the outcome of this is. And finally, Amtrak seeks federal grant for Chicago Union Station project and speeds up Acela trains. So the major reason I brought this up is because Amtrak is seeking funding to make some connection improvements into the Chicago Union Station. A lot of this stuff was on the wish list for quite some time. But now with the passing of that infrastructure bill, funding has become available. So a lot of this stuff is now funding is now being pursued to accomplish some of these goals. One of the goals is building a new connection a direct connection from the St. Charles airline into Chicago Union Station. That's going to be an interesting, I'm watching this because I'm very curious to see how this works out. The St. Charles airline, the drawbridge portion of it, has been out of service now for almost 2 years. The city of Chicago was doing some river work, restoring, putting steel piles in to reinforce Lumber Street along the river, along the sanitary canal, and they made, while they were doing that, near the St. Charles airline bridge, the drawbridge, they severed some communication cables that made the bridge essentially inoperable. So the bridge has been stuck up down in the air for almost 2 years, and there hasn't been any mitigation done to either correct the problem or correct the issue. So to me, that's my biggest thing. I'm curious to see how that works out. Now the CSX which is one of the weird areas. CSX owns the bridge, but no CSX traffic travels over it. This was part of the many consolidations and different things that took place in the past where CSX ended up the responsible for the St. Charles Airline Bridge. It was essentially strictly only operated by trains that was traversing from Amtrak from Union Station to and from Union Station. Certainly it was the Illinois State trains and the City of New Orleans, and then some freight traffic was also used that bridge, which would be essentially it was Canadian National that was doing interchanges with the BNSF or the Union Pacific over at either near Global One or 16th and Western for the BNSF. So this bridge has been out of service, I said, for going on 2 years, and I'm curious to see if Amtrak gets the funding, because it's stated in the statement that there may be some type of agreement to either acquire the rights to the St. Charles Airline from CSX by Amtrak, or some other means to be able to get control and be able to utilize this bridge, and because as it does serve as the essential link to many parts of Chicago Union Station. So we'll see how that plays out. All right, so now here we go to our main story. This story is interesting, to say the least. I'll say this, it's interesting because I ended up coming up with this story or researching this story as I was at the Pullman Days event, which took place back in early May on the south side of Chicago at the Pullman railcar plant facility, the historic National Park Pullman area. And we were standing there, as me, my wife, the kids, and I wanted to take them to show them some of the private cars that Pullman used to build. That these were essential. This was the first class travel of the early 20th century, and thought it was just good history that, I like I'm a history guy, I love history, so I wanted to show them some of the things that people sometimes don't recognize was actually built in Chicago, Hammond, Indiana. I grew up right around the corner from the Pullman plant that was in Hammond. So to me, I like the historical reference of understanding exactly what Pullman meant to Chicago. And as I've started to research this podcast a little bit more, a lot of other parts of the country too. So as I was thinking about that, I was just wanted to kind of research a little bit, like exactly why did Pullman shut down? Why did America divest, or as another term people like to use, defund passenger rail service? First answer typically comes to because of the automobiles. Yeah, there's a little bit of truth to that, but not as much truth as one would think. So, here we go. It was our national policy, upon this research, it was our national policy that plunged many of our urban communities into disarray. I was sitting in the line at Pullman Days event waiting to view the very last car that Pullman built. It was the Amtrak Superliner 32009. And yes, the 32009 is actually still in service, and it's still in service in Amtrak's fleet. One of our few sleeper cars that we have. This car was the last Pullman standard car built in 1981. As I was listening to conversations taking place in line, talking about the Pullman neighborhood, something dawned on me. When Pullman produced his last car, the national policy to disenfranchise urban black communities around the Midwest and other population centers, the disenfranchisement was nearing its completion. What do I mean by disenfranchisement? I'll get to that. Give me a second. The steel industry had been successfully consolidated in cities like Chicago, Gary, East Chicago, Cleveland, Detroit were left willing after many of those good-paying jobs were lost. At the time, the rail passenger service was left to die by suicide, thus leaving builders. Jeez, I'm struggling right now. I apologize. Let me try that again. At that time, the rail passenger business was left to die by suicide, and thus leaving builders of this equipment also to die a slow death. Congress and the presidential administrations didn't decide to stop subsidizing big business. What they did decide was what businesses to subsidize and the impact it would have on middle-class black Americans. Primarily how it diminishes their economic power. Challenge me all you want in that statement. This ain't a college lecture. I've done my research on this. Look at the policies of Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush 1 and tell me something different. Standing in this line thinking about the history of the George C. Pullman Company, help me tie a lot of this together. The big aha moment for me was the date the last car was produced, 1981. By this time, Big Oil and other industrials like the Koch brothers were putting the wrong plans together to kill passenger and commuter rail across the country. You juxtapose that with the manufactured war on drugs. Now you have done an economic policy disenfranchisement of black communities. And this disenfranchisement was quiet, stealthy, and so long that it happened right in our faces, but we didn't recognize all the forces at work. Hell, I didn't tie it together until I was standing in line on 111th Street in the historic Pullman district on the south side of Chicago, waiting to see some historic passenger cars. The desired outcomes have been reached in these areas. What makes me want to say something about this? Because knowing history gives us tools to solve problems and prevent new ones to come into fruition. And it's constantly being written. You must know the rules of the game to play it effectively. You must know all the avenues that are being attacked so you can launch a counteroffensive. As I said before, do the research. It's out there. Harvard, the University of Chicago, and many other esteemed institutions of academia have conducted studies that show that this has been done with intent. I'm just tying it all together. Look at how the American passenger rail service was slowly killed off and why. The first response will be because everyone had cars now and the service was no longer needed. People throw that out there like it was inevitable. It wasn't. Heavy lobbying by the automobile and oil industries pushed policy that everyone had a car and passenger rail service was cut. This wasn't a natural progression. It was artificial and fueled by dollars from the auto and oil industries. Unintended consequences or deliberate. So I'm going to give you a couple key dates here. And the reason I point out these key dates is because some of this stuff lines up. Like I said, this is just to give you an overview of why I say this is all, I ain't going to say opinion, this is factual. So these are some of the dates that are crucial. And if you go back historically, you'll see on the political side what was taking place at those times. So to me, these dates are key, and this is what I kind of, just a shortened version of the outline that I'll put together. So in 1958, the Pullman Standard closed the Chicago plant on Cottage Grove Avenue and 111th Street. 1961, the foundry at the Hammond, Indiana plant was closed. 1967, Pullman still appeared to be in the fight of staying in business with the completion of the Champ Carey Technical Center in Hammond. So it looked like Pullman was like, they went through some rough times, but they were trying to evolve and compete with the times of the day. So, 1967, they were still in a fight, still looking to see what they could do in this industry or others. 1970, the Chicago Calumet shops were closed. 1970 also, the Michigan City freight car plant was closed. In 1981, the very last passenger car ever built by Pullman rolls off the assembly line at the Hammond, Indiana plant, the Amtrak Superliner 32009. As this was being the last car being produced, it was named the George M. Pullman. 1983, Pullman sold its freight car plants to Trinity Industries. Pullman would continue to sell off assets and patents, and one of the final large railroad assets, the freight car plants in Bessemer, Alabama and Butler, Pennsylvania, were sold off to Trinity Industries of Dallas, Texas in 1994. If you juxtapose these dates of the Pullman Company shutting down plants and selling off assets, the national economic policies of that time, you can't help but notice the correlation. The federal policy was enacted here, and the repercussions were felt here. All of the major manufacturing industries, including steel, automobile, just to name two of them, had similar fates and shifted the economic power out of middle-class areas of the African American communities. Now, don't get me wrong, many other races worked these jobs too, but often they were chalked up as casualties of the economic war, so sort of friendly fire casualties. The war on drugs wasn't really a war on drugs. It was a criminal and economic policy attack on the quote-unquote hippie liberal population in the black community. These are the words from a Nixon administrating staffer. So this came from CNN. Report, aide says Nixon's war on drugs targeted blacks and hippies. We all kind of knew that already. But here's some more of it. Hey, so I'm gonna butcher this guy's name, but I'll try and say it anyway. And Reckleman said, we could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the war, about the drugs? Of course we did. And Reckman's comments is the first time the war on drugs has been plainly characterized as a political assault designed to help Nixon win and keep the White House. It's a stark departure from Nixon's public explanation for his first piece of legislation in the war on drugs, delivered in a message to Congress in 1969, which framed it as a response to an increase in heroin addiction and the rising use of marijuana and hallucinogens by students. However, Nixon's political focus on white voters, the silent majority, is well known, and Nixon's derision for minorities in private is well known from his White House recordings. The comments come as there had been a marked shift in attitudes toward handling drug use, ranging from legalization of marijuana in various states to White House candidates focusing heavily on the treatment as an answer to New Hampshire's heroin epidemic while they were campaigning across the state. So when we look at that, we look at some of that, and if you look at the, you can go in on that CNN, just Google CNN, Nixon's administration aide discussing the war on drugs. It goes into detail, but to me, that's when it came out publicly. But the wheels of attacking the black community and the liberal community was in motion many, many times. Nixon, let's not get it twisted. Nixon was carrying on the torch of the previous administrations. He just said it out loud to the point where everybody else heard it. And somebody just came out, one of the Nixon aides at the time, in 1994, went ahead and explained exactly what they were doing and why they were doing it. So when you look at these different things and you look at the different types of things that were going on, it was clear that the government, that the United States government at that time, did not enjoy the economic power that was taking place in the African American community. Many times before, we've seen throughout history when African American communities thrived in this country. Every time they thrived, somehow, some way, what was built was destroyed. Whether it was the firebombing and the U.S. military attacking, assisting the local white population in destroying Black Wall Street in Tulsa, to the many other race riots and everything that took place in that time frame, including even the war on drugs, because the war on drugs is actually the drugs were brought into the African American community by the CIA, by the federal government, and then they turned around, they dumped it in our community and then attacked us for attacking us for having what the U.S. government supplied us. So when you look at those different things, this has been the story. This is the history that nobody wants to talk about. We talk about the violent crimes that's taking place here in Chicago now and the other areas. Everybody wants to highlight that, but nobody wants to highlight how we got here. Knowing how we got here is a big cause. It's not for sympathy or empathy, but understand that these things took place for a reason. These things took place for reasons, very nefarious reasons. Destroy our community, weaken our communities. So I like to bring these things up because I don't think every conversation requires a bit of nuance. So just lumping everything together, when you see why neighborhoods and areas are the way that they are now, this process didn't begin 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Some of this stuff is may even go back 100 years, and they just set the table for these things to happen. And so to me, it's very, I think it's important. This is why I'm highlighting it, and because I just think that it's important that we know what's going on. I talk about Pullman and the deindustrialization of urban America. It wasn't just businesses that were targeted either in many of these cases. The education systems started to shift in these matters too. Many technical educational programs were eliminated or defunded during this time. Every major school system has some type of technical high school in their district. My hometown of Hammond, Indiana had Hammond Technical High School. Or for those of us whose parents grew up in that area, it was simply known as Tech. Tech eventually was restructured to area career center that served many students from not only Hammond, but surrounding communities. This is just an example of tech schools being diluted, but this story was repeated many times over the course of time and in our urban centers. Why is all this important? Because you talk about where America stands now without revisiting the path to why we are here. People always want to point out the violence in these areas. Many of these areas were thriving communities at one point in time. And despite the many obstacles that were systematically put in place, redlining, they were very self-sufficient. But as was mentioned in the CNN story, the United States government, again, using its broad federal powers, systematically attacked these regions. So instead of using fire bombs and roving hordes to destroy our communities, they went a different way. They went to policy, shifting policies and shifting funding to attack our communities, to accomplish the same thing that the race riots or the wars on our communities that were destroyed. did this in a more slower, methodical way than a all of a sudden vicious, violent way. But it still had the same consequences. Our communities were destroyed. In one of my podcast episodes from season 1, I talked about how the interstate highway system was used to target black communities, and not just low-income black communities, as was discussed in the relocation of a prominent black neighborhood in St. Louis, Missouri, during the expansion of runways at Lambert International Airport. Many of these residents were forced to take less money than their property was worth, and a large chunk of that population ended up in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm pretty sure that city name sounds very familiar. How do we correct this? First step is denying that this happened. Acknowledge that this has been a detriment to the United States of America. Also recognize that if this continues, we will fall like many of the other empires of the past. In this pursuit to keep black Americans disenfranchised, we put ourselves in a position to the climate. I'm sorry. We've put ourselves in a position to have the climate be the demise of all mankind, heavily subsidizing automobiles, trucks, and the oil industries, and not investing in public transit, especially on the heavy rail side of things. We've had some major unintended consequences. Everyone else on the planet has continued to invest in not just passenger rail, but high-speed passenger rail, and they are seeing the benefits. Will America finally do the right thing? Or is this just a Democratic administration thing and we'll see funding cut off once another administration takes over the Oval Office? I'm not going to lie. I don't have confidence we will continue to properly invest and do the right thing. I'm just being honest because when Obama tried this, when he first got in office, a lot of the Republican red states kicked the money back. Kind of a slap in the face and said, we don't want your money, we don't want this, we don't want that. Trump I'm not going to say Trump divested in passenger service, it just kind of stayed status quo, which for me, it surprised me, but the funding wasn't cut. So that's it. To me, that was a surprise. There were other Republicans that were trying to cut it, but it never made it into the budget. So funding didn't increase, funding didn't decrease, it just stayed status quo. But in the big picture of things, I just don't think that we're going to continue to invest. We lost a lot of people like to talk about the California high-speed rail project. And to be honest with you, at one point in time, we were the leaders and innovators in this type of technology in these areas, but because of what we've done, essentially to disenfranchise the black community, we've lost a lot of expertise and knowledge in these areas. I mean, majority of our equipment that's being purchased now comes from Siemens, which is a German company, but they built the plant here in the U.S. Why is that? Why don't we have a Pullman standard anymore? Why don't we have a Bud company anymore? Answer is simple. Because we never invested. We started divesting in our passenger rail system. If you take the normal life cycle of passenger equipment, let's say maybe 10 to 20 years. Overhaul, you can get an extra 10 years out of it. Okay. But if you do that on a kind of consistent basis and consistently ordering cars and consistently updating all passenger rail service, not just Amtrak, because remember, a lot of the Pullman wasn't just building cars for just Amtrak or things like that. Commuter railroads were purchasing equipment. If we could have kept the funding consistent, where commuter agencies were able to constantly keep their equipment up to date, we would be so much further than we are now. Let's look at even Metra in Illinois. Metra is operating some equipment that's older than me plus 20 years. And the reason being is that for a good chunk of the early 2000s, and especially during the Rounder administration, Metra received no funding from the state or from the federal government. Metra did some very good innovative things to keep their agency running and up and running, But the fact of the matter was there has not been any consistent investment. So if you don't have consistent investment, that's why you have your places like Pullman shut down, because they can't. If you don't have orders, you can't maintain a business. So if you would have went through the life cycles of this equipment, there would constantly be consistent orders coming in. So the other thing people thought, oh, well, that's just subsidizing big business. We do it anyway. We subsidize big business. We subsidize oil. We subsidize the airlines. We subsidize every other business. So this isn't like this would be some out of the norm for the American government. But what it did is it made sure that these companies could not thrive, which is now why we have to source all our technology from other countries that have been consistently investing in their passenger rail service. Let's just be honest. That's what it comes down to. No investment, no businesses. No businesses, no jobs. And when I talk about Pullman, I talk about the steel industry. There are many support industries that also relied on those contracts and relied on those to be suppliers to those companies for the different finished products. So you look at, you see certain areas, the industrialized areas, you got your big factories that are shut down, but you got smaller auxiliary factories that were located near those areas that also help drive and thrive businesses and also help keep the communities funded and everything. You saw that. But with that disinvestment in passenger rail service, it killed a lot of our urban communities, because let's not be wrong. Pullman had plants not only in the Midwest, it had plants in New York, had plants around Philadelphia, had plants in Alabama, as I mentioned, a couple of the freight car plants. These plants were in, you had Bug Company, they had plants in New York, there were plants everywhere producing rail equipment, passenger rail equipment at that. But for the years of starvation, 1981 was when the last car rolled off the line. In 1974, they knew that was going to be the last car rolling off their assembly line. Because the way that they had to liquidate their assets, because they couldn't get consistent orders, because no one else had funding to carry out those orders. None of the transit agencies had funding or anything to help them maintain a state of good repair, which means refurbishing equipment, which means purchasing and acquiring new equipment. We just didn't have that. And all of it was because I say to disenfranchise the urban America. And let's say, I did say, black communities, but let's not get it misconstrued. It targeted all of the lower class. A lot of times we like to classify things by race, but it was to target the liberals, to target the black communities, to target areas that relied on those businesses, and with those businesses gone, they would struggle. Look at the data. Look at the policies. Look at why every other country in the world, pretty much every other major country in the world, is investing in passenger service and have been, and researching and figuring out better ways to do it than we have. We've made small progress over the time. Very small progress over the time, as compared with China, as compared with Germany, as compared with France. They're doing the right thing. We're about 30 years behind them, and that's sad. Well, that's my rant for today. I don't want to keep you guys too long, but just want to say thank you for tuning in to the Diverging Clear Podcast, episode number 3. I do want to show you one thing, though, before I do keep to that. Sorry, jumped the gun here. I wanted to show you guys the last car that was produced by the Pullman company that's still in service for Amtrak. This is the AMTK, as I call it, AMTK 32009, 32009. The Superliner George M. Pullman. The George M. Pullman, this one car is special. They did everything on the interior with hardwood trim. This is the sort of the Cadillac of the Amtrak passenger car Superliner fleet because of the extra trimmings and everything they did with it. But this is the George M. Pullman Amtrak 32009. That is the very last car that was produced by the George Pullman Rail Car Company. They built it so well, it is still in service. 1981 to 2022 is still in service. So if we could build stuff like that could last that long, why didn't we continue to invest in it? We should have been exporting cars across the world, but instead, they're coming here to build equipment for us. And why? Seriously, this time that is the last part of my statement. Like I said, thank you for tuning in to the Diverging Clear Podcast, episode number 3, Pullman and the Disenfranchisement of Urban America. Don't forget to click that subscribe and like button on YouTube. And if you're listening to the audio version on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Anchor, don't forget to subscribe to that also. For any questions or comments, you can hit us up at divergingclearpodcast@gmail.com. Also follow us on Twitter at divergingclear1 and on Instagram at diverging_clear_podcast and on Facebook. If you enjoyed the podcast, please share it with a friend. Thank you again for tuning in. Be safe out there. Talk to you soon. Rest in peace, Mom. I love you. Sad this is gonna be my first episode without you, but pretty sure y'all got YouTube or Spotify out there in heaven. I hope you can tune in to this episode. Love you, Ma. Y'all take care. Y'all be safe out there.
Diverging Clear is sponsored by EME Rail Solutions, LLC. We don't own rail cars, locomotives, or tracks, but if you do, we provide cutting-edge solutions to maximize your assets. Visit us at emerail.net to learn more. Diverging Clear is also brought to you by Three Kings Freight Brokerage, LLC. Visit threekingsfreightbrokeragellc.com to learn more about their services.
The Diverging Clear Podcast is also brought to you in part by Precision Logistics, LLC. Precision Logistics, LLC, meeting tomorrow's logistical needs today. Visit www.precisionlogisticsllc.info to learn how.